Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to The Brown Show. Dr. Survé, thank you so much for coming back on our show. Last time you were here, we announced that your group, the Sekunjalo Investment Holding Group, has just sued the presidency and the state for 75 billion rand. So today we'd like to follow up on that. So Sekunjalo just sued for 75 billion rand, and Sagamata has just announced that they've also sued for an additional 50 billion rand in the state case. So people are saying that you are suing to get money back to pay for the losses of your company, and the South African public is concerned, for they believe that this money is coming from taxpayers' money. So what are your thoughts on this?
Gina, thank you for having me back on your show. I think that you are right that Sagamata has sued for $3 billion and Sekunjalo has sued for $4 billion. There are two completely different cases. The one relates to the Reserve Bank having deliberately stopped the listing of Sagamata on the New York Stock Exchange, and it allowed, for example, Naspers process to list in Amsterdam. These were both multi-sided platform companies. The Sekunjalo case is the cumulative losses, and that's where you're quite correct that it is indeed the losses that our group companies have suffered directly as a result of the intervention of the state. Here we can look at what the presidency has done in the establishment of the Party Commission, which was a smear campaign against us with no factual basis to it, etc. We can look at the role of the FSCA, the SIPC. We can look at the role of the JSE, which is a regulatory body. We can look at the role of, the South African Reserve Bank, the Prudential Authority. All of them have acted by commission and omission. In some cases, also other state organs. Now, our group has suffered these damages, and these are not future earnings. These are current value that's damaged these companies. It has caused significant stress to our employees. It has caused layoffs, retrenchments. It has caused loss of jobs. The 40,000 dependents that have been affected by that. We have supported many black businesses as suppliers, as customers. We have earned foreign exchange for this country. So the impact of what the presidency and the government has done is to really effectively, economically sabotage a black-owned business, especially if you consider that some of our companies are operating in sectors where there are very few other black companies operating. We're up against establishment companies. We're one of the few black companies to have listed companies directly on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange that we control, own, and manage. So all of that is under threat right now. So this is all about transformation, job creation. And so our suing the presidency and the state organs is to ensure that people cannot abuse state power and really push back transformation in this country. They cannot put at risk people's jobs, people's lives, and especially at a time when there is 75% youth unemployment in this country. And so we have to do this because we owe it to our employees. We owe it to the legacy of empowerment, transformation. We owe it to all our thousands of suppliers, customers, and also the reputation of our company and the reputation of our group and the reputation of our executives. So we would not do such a thing very lightly, but we have no choice really that we have to do this.
Well, so back to the core of your argument, what reasons do you have to explain or justify what you mean by the government is causing sabotage against yourself and your group?
Well, we have evidence, first of all, in terms of the government's actions, in terms of what they've done. We have, for example, the FSCA unlawfully raiding our offices to create a impression that of wrongdoing. We have SIPC, acting against our companies, both IO and Sagamata, where we've invested in. We have the JSC under instruction politically doing certain things. We have the presidency that refuses to allow us to set aside the party commission by simply not responding to our review application, even though we've done this, for 3 years. We have the banks, many of whom tell us, privately that they're under instruction politically to close our accounts by the politicians. So we have this situation now where there's a multitude of evidence, but most importantly, it will be interesting for the president to be interrogated in a court of law, because we set out in our papers why the president is involved. I think the Reserve Bank governor could be interrogated, the Prudential Authority person, the FSCA head could be interrogated, those investigators could be interrogated in a court of law. So our case, the evidence will obviously emerge in the papers, and the evidence will also emerge as we go to court. I think government is on very thin grounds because they know that the evidence is overwhelmingly in our favor, because there's meetings, there's emails, there's lots of other bits of evidence. And I think what the people, the protagonists behind this economic sabotage of our company didn't expect, firstly, is that we would survive this onslaught against us, which has gone on for 5 years since Ramaphosa became president. And secondly, they thought we would do nothing. But slowly we've been accumulating the evidence year on year that we have gotten from whistleblowers, that we have gotten from, papers, so to speak, email, correspondence, documents, etc. So all of this will be discovered in the court process, and government will have to account. I personally don't think that government is going to risk this going to court, because they know the implication. The implication for this is far beyond just, for example, the term of President Ramaphosa, because as we institute this action, he could be held personally liable and accountable for this, even if he's out of office, and so could his ministers, and so could the fiduciary officers of the FSCA, the Reserve Bank, and others. They could all be held to account once the evidence is in fact produced that this was an orchestrated, instructed economic sabotage against our group.
All right, well, so articles have mentioned that since your acquisition of independent media is when the smear campaign had commenced. So to what extent has independent media been a threat to Ramaphosa and other state organs?
I think it's important to understand we are the owner, along with other shareholders, of independent media. We do not determine the articles, the news that occurs in independent media. There would be many weeks that I would go by, for example, and not read an independent media or any other newspaper because I'm overseas. As an example, the last 2 months I've been overseas for at least more than half the time. I would, maybe when I'm overseas, I'll read the international newspapers. So it's not unusual for me to, when I come back and I review our newspapers, to actually see that there are articles that are critical of different role players in the country. Now, it is a fact that it is our group that publicized the CR17 funders, which has now been sealed by the courts. But we published it first. And that was important because it was important to show who had funded the president to become the president. The first time in the history of the country, of the ANC, a president had raised several billion to be able to become the president of a political party. And he was funded by established businesses such as HCI's Johnny Copeland, Maria Ramos of Absa Bank. He is funded by the Ruperts indirectly through a third party in London, the Oppenheimers and the various family members, and a whole host of other establishment, and the banks in particular funded him. Now, that's okay as long as that information is public. And unfortunately, our media house, not me, our editors and journalists were brave enough. Well, firstly, they were able to find the information. And secondly, when they found the information, they were able to publish it. Now, the COVID time produced terrible devastation, loss of lives, healthcare workers in this country, nurses, doctors, other healthcare professionals, hospital workers, sacrificed so much to save patients' lives. And government was supposed to buy them protective equipment, PPEs, so they can be safeguarded from the COVID virus at the time. Instead, what had happened, almost 30 billion, according to the SIU, I think it's at 17 and an additional 13 billion, was in fact stolen by various parties, and they took the money, overcharged the state when, we could have had so much more equipment and hospital care for the poorest and for the health workers.
We therefore have to ensure that the responsible officials, private sector parties identified, should be harshly punished, and a clear message should be sent out to the would-be maladministrators and the corrupt that action will be taken against them. It is really disheartening to see state officials in all spheres of government who have been called to serve the people of South Africa being implicated in unlawful and illegal activities in procurement processes that are meant to benefit the public, with corrupt intent to unduly benefit themselves.
Our newspapers were the first to expose the corruption that went directly to the heart of the presidency. And that was Ms. Diko, that was with her husband, was implicated in this matter.
One of the implicated public officials is President Cyril Ramaphosa spokesperson Kusela Diko. While the SIU has found no evidence so far directly linking her to corrupt PPE deals, it raised concern that Diko had failed to declare financial interests.
Now, I'm not saying they're guilty or not guilty, but the fact is, because of us, and because when our newspapers publicized this, government came out and said it's fake news. And eventually we produced the evidence. And once we produced the evidence, then only then did the other media come out and actually show that South Africa had been defrauded. There was corruption to the extent of, at least 10 to 20 to 30 billion. Then we had many other instances, the looting of Eskom, which led to load shedding. We exposed that during the time of the previous president. We exposed that now during the time of Ramaphosa. If you take the famous Pala Pala, we exposed the fact that there were these dollars under the sofa. We were the first to do that. Again, News 24, Daily Maverick initially called it fake news. In the end, the former Chief Justice Sandile Nobo corroborated what we had said, that indeed, millions of dollars had been stolen from the president's farm. And the question arises, what is the president doing with millions of dollars in cash? Now, this is the role of independent media. This is the role of investigative journalism. Obviously, it makes the president uncomfortable. It makes the ministers uncomfortable. It makes officials of government uncomfortable. But we have a duty to our country to be able to save it from disaster. Transparency International ranks South Africa one of the worst and most corrupt countries in the world. We have dropped to 83 in the world. What's important to know, that under President Ramaphosa, our corruption ranking is the worst ever. Despite people talking about state capture years and all of those things, never before have we had such a bad ranking in terms of corruption as Transparency International came out with President Ramaphosa. Now, we are not against the president. We are not against the ANC. We are not against ministers. it suits them to say Dr. Survé is against the president, Dr. Survé is against this one, Dr. Survé is against the ANC. Far from it. We love our country. We want our country to succeed. We have youth unemployment of 75%. We have general unemployment of 35%. By actually having an independent, free press and pointing out these issues, we hope that our president, the ministers, our government takes what is in our newspapers and actually deals with what is being said or online. Don't tackle the man or our businesses. So instead, what has happened, because we are a critical voice, an alternative voice, exposing corruption and exposing what is essentially become a mafia state, I am being targeted, my businesses are being targeted, independent media is being targeted by the state agencies. And what it basically means is that, we'll unleash on you all state institutions, state organs, from every single sector that you can think about, unless you stop this criticism against, the country, leadership that is actually causing all of this. From our point of view, we hope the president listens to what we are saying, listens to the journalists. Now, of course, I can easily walk away from the journalists and editors, but they have the independence and they have found their voice precisely because I've given them the right to do that. I have not gone and sort of tried to stop them. I have said to them, your only duty is to truth. Your only duty is to the poor people of this country. Your only duty is to bring our country back so that we can all enjoy it, including the very poorest people of this country. And if you don't do that, we're going to end up with a failed state. And Transparency International's index ranking us so low recognizes that increasingly we are becoming a failed state. So I hope not. Someone like myself is an ambassador for South Africa. When I'm overseas, I encourage investment. I encourage people to work with our president. I encourage them to work with our ministers. I encourage them to come to our country. I was meeting with international bankers and we were sitting, at a hotel looking at the beautiful sunset in Cape Town. And rather than say to them, don't invest here, I said the opposite. I said that this is a fantastic place to invest because I recognize that, by investing, we can create jobs. But I also can't tell people to invest if the government of the country doesn't want to have criticism. And because someone criticizes the government of the country, they want to silence the person that owns that portion of the media. What person in the world is going to invest if that happens? So we don't want any special favors from anybody. Neither do we want to be punitive to our government, to the ANC, the ruling party, but we are acting in the interest of our country. And I can liken this to during the apartheid days. During the apartheid days, there were many people that stood up and fought apartheid. But there were also many, black and white, that did not. And they were quite happy to enjoy the fruits of whatever was happening during apartheid. Those who sacrificed and stood up against apartheid did not do this with an intention of any kind of financial or material gain. They did it because it was the right thing to do. What we are doing is not for financial gain. Of course, we have to quantify the losses that we've suffered, but it's not for financial gain. Ultimately, this is for the purpose of doing the right thing and making sure future generations don't have to deal with this abuse of power.
Well, on that point then, I just want to know finally, beyond financial compensation, what are Sekunjalo's objectives in pursuing this case? Why should the South African public care, and does this also benefit them?
That's such a good question, because if you look at the Sagamata prospectus for argument's sake, we had raised $400 million from international investors. We were going to list on an international stock exchange. We had gone to New York, to the NYSE, New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ. We had gone to Hong Kong. We had some of the world's incredible investors in some of the world's sovereign funds. No South African investors, by the way, just to be very clear. These were all international investors, $400 million. At the time, when we approached the Reserve Bank for the foreign listing, the Reserve Bank said to us, well, what are you going to do with the money? And we said, well, we're going to invest it back to create, and you can look at the Sagamata prospectus. We're going to create 5,000 jobs for young people on the African continent, predominantly in South Africa, teaching them tech skills, etc., taking graduates into our system. So we become the first multi-sided platform unicorn on the African continent. And we can grow technology and all of those things from there. And so the idea was that we would employ at least 5,000 new people over and above the 2,500 people that were already employed by the various businesses in the Sagamata stable. Now, why would it be any different today? So were we to be able to be successful in our case against the presidency, state organs, the Reserve Bank, we'll take that money and invest it, as we said in our prospectus, for the training of young people that are currently unemployed, that have got great skills and great energy, and we'll take them into the technological era so that we create not 5,000 jobs, we will create probably 50,000 jobs of young people in the country now. And so the idea is for the money that we get from all of this to be invested back. Don't forget, we have paid in various group companies over the last two decades billions of taxes, and that unfortunately was lost as a result of this economic sabotage. So at the end of the day, by generating this wealth, generating these businesses, creating the employment for the young people, we also pay taxes. We have foreign exchange for our country, and we lift, the tech skills of our country to be able to compete with the likes of the modern economies of the world. Africa's greatest asset is its young people. South Africa's greatest asset is its young people. However, it's very important that government must not act like a mafia state and abuse its power. Because if young people see that, they're going to say, well, what hope do we have if a company, one of the most successful black companies in South Africa, one of the most successful business leaders like myself, a billionaire businessman. There are very few black billionaires in this country. If the government can act like that against someone like myself, who is so pro-transformation, and my track record speaks for itself, what hope is there? Then we've gone back 30, 40 years, back to the apartheid days. And that's not good. Apartheid wasn't just about racial discrimination. Apartheid was not every white person benefited under apartheid. Apartheid was about greed, corporate greed, and abuse of power by a few people that use an ideology to oppress an entire country, both black and white. We can never allow that to happen again. The only difference now is that the actors are not necessarily white, they are mainly black. And so we cannot allow that to happen. I am hopeful that the president will not see what we are doing as confrontational, will not see what we are doing as an attempt to undermine the government, the ANC, etc. I'm hopeful that he will see this as an opportunity to constructively engage with us and to actually sit down with us and say, well, you know what, we are all South Africans. We want to create the best for our country. Let's find out how we can do that. If there's been an abuse of state power, then let's put in systems to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And let's open the economy to foreign investors and others to create jobs, and they can feel that their investments are safe. I, as a South African, my investments are no longer safe because banks have been instructed by the politicians, and some of the banks don't have to be instructed. They simply just take the cue from the politicians to actually shut our accounts. That cannot be a democracy. That goes against absolutely everything in our constitution today. And our suing the presidency, organs of state, so far for $7 billion is a very important signal to our government. Please, act fairly, act justly, and act, most importantly, in the interest of the country.
Great. Thank you for your insights today. That's all the time we have for the day. But thank you so much for coming back onto the show. Look forward to following.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Really happy to be back on your show again. Thank you.